When Resident Evil 4 Remake came out in March of 2023, I made it a personal goal of mine to complete all 9 of the mainline numbered Resident Evil games and do a ranking. This was just a personal goal of mine that, obviously since this video is coming out in 2026, I was not able to achieve. But then, in 2025, in June of 2025, Capcom announced that they were going to release Resident Evil Requiem, the 9th entry in the franchise, and I was like, oh, cool. I have another chance to do this, and all I have left is Resident Evil 5 and 6. This should be really easy. And then I, kind of didn't play 5 until, February of 2026, 3 weeks before the game came out. But I played Resident Evil 5, I played Resident Evil Requiem when it came out, streamed all of that, and then I played Resident Evil 6, and it's finally here. I'm able to rank all 9 mainline games. Couple of small things that I have to point out. One, I've never played any of the first 4 original games, so when I'm talking about those are strictly the remakes. 2, as I already said, this will only count the 9 numbered game I'm counting. That's it. Let's get into it.
Resident Evil 6.
The infamous Resident Evil 6. The game's so bad they had to take 5 years off to completely reinvent the franchise. I'll never understand that despite being a widely acclaimed game, the biggest criticism of Part 4 was always that it was too much action. So then they doubled down in Part 5, and despite it being financially the biggest success of the franchise, it was not critically acclaimed or really loved by the fans. So then they just tripled down in 6. This is literally a Michael Bay directed Resident Evil game. There is not a single second that you can take seriously. There is not a single second that is intense or scary. It's all insanely over-the-top explosions and fights. Since this game has 4 campaigns, I'm just going to run through my thoughts on them real quick. Leon's campaign is actually not half bad. For the first few hours, I didn't really understand why people hated this game so much. The opening college segment was really good and effectively tense. This section at the cathedral was the most Resident Evil feeling thing in this entire game because there's actually puzzles, and I enjoyed solving them. Even the ridiculous sequence of Leon taking over this plane when the pilot gets infected is pretty fun. Unfortunately, everything just falls apart when we get introduced to this terrible, terrible main villain, Wilson. Not only is this guy just a terrible character, but we fight him 5 times in 2 hours. I'll be on record saying I don't necessarily mind fighting the same boss several times throughout the game. I mean, hell, almost every boss of RE2 is some form of Birkin. Almost every boss in Resident Evil 3 is some form of Nemesis, and I don't hate those. But it's significantly different every time, and they're spread across a several-hour campaign. In this case, it's literally back to back to back to back to back. Every BOW in this game looks fucking stupid as hell, but this dog Wilson thing might just take the cake. Also, editor's note, I just learned this guy's name is actually Simmons. I don't know where I got Wilson from, but that tells you how terrible a villain he is. I don't even remember his name. I will give it to this game that Helena does have a little more story reason to exist and a little more personality than all of these other fill-in for co-op partners, but man, she just really loves withholding information for no reason, doesn't she?
Tolok's Cathedral. I'll explain everything there. Let's just get to the cathedral, and then I'll tell you everything.
You want to tell me what's down there?
It's better if I show you. Let's just get her out of here. And then I'll tell you everything.
Also, I lied. We're not talking about the rest of the campaigns because Leon's is the only one that has any kind of value. I couldn't really find anything else any interesting or worth saying about any of the other campaigns. They're all very boring and very stupid and very bad, but not in a fun or interesting way. It's bad. All these campaigns are bad except Leon's, which is tolerable, I guess. Here's the thing. On paper, I really like the idea of bringing back all these legacy characters and seeing the events of this same story from 4 different perspectives. I just don't think the story is anywhere near as good to be able to pull something like this off. At no point does it feel like seeing the same cutscene 2, 3, 4 times really add to the context, really make the story much more tragic or much more interesting. It just doesn't. It just drags on forever. There's a reason why Call of Duty and Resident Evil games campaigns are among the shortest in gaming. It's because whether you're talking about being scared the whole time or killing Nazis the entire time, you just can't keep up that same intensity or adrenaline for more than 8 or 10 hours, and RE6 tries to keep it up for like 30. It just gets so monotonous that by the halfway point, I was just so numb to the gameplay style. I was so ready for it to be over because I was just so sick of it, and I still had 2 more campaigns to go. I don't want to talk about this game. I don't want to think about this game. I don't want to play the game. It's so boring. There's nothing here. It's so bad. Also, can we talk about how absolutely awful the inventory and the menu screens are in this game? First of all, you literally can't pause the game. Like, you literally, you cannot pause the game. I'm not even joking. I'm serious. Like, there's not a way. Unless I'm missing something. If you push the escape button, which on PC is like the default pause button, it just pulls up like a menu screen for settings, which looks ugly as shit, by the way. It looks terrible. And it's different for every character, so like all your buttons are all rearranged for no reason. But arguably even worse was the inventory screens. No, you can't just take an herb. Are you stupid? You have to go into your inventory screen, combine your herbs, store them in your case, whatever the hell that means, and then you can take it. No, you can't just equip a grenade. You have to use the item wheel and spin your mouse 15 times to be able to switch from the perpendicular thing going that way for the guns and the other thing going this way for the grenades and first aid, and then throw it. And again, I'm willing to admit that I'm just not good at video games because I'm not. But I feel like I've played enough video games where I should be able to understand the menu screen. It shouldn't be this complicated. Like, I had to go hours without taking a first aid spray because I literally could not figure out how to. Like, there's no excuse for that. RE6, it's a bad game. I don't want to talk about it anymore. I don't want to think about it anymore. I never want to play it again. It's bad. Let's move on, please.
Resident Evil 0.
Resident Evil 0 is kind of an outlier in this franchise, as it's the only numbered entry you just never really hear anybody ever talk about. It's a prequel to the original Resident Evil, released around the same time as the remake, and that's really the best thing it has going for it. It's got a very similar style and vibe and color grading as that game, and as somebody who absolutely loves that game and absolutely loves how that game looks, it's cool to have kind of another game that is kind of replicating that style. The thing this game is most famous for, or infamous for, depending on what side you land on it, is the very unique inventory system and gameplay mechanics. As opposed to the 2 campaigns that the first 2 games had, and like the A-B scenarios, you're playing as 2 characters at the same time, Rebecca and Billy, and splitting your resources between each of their 6 inventory slots. It's overall something that I am very mixed on. I liked how the game forced you to strategize around it. There's multiple times where you can only send one character to do a task. And I like that, if you don't divide up your health and ammo, that it can really screw you over. I, in the early game, really heavily favored Rebecca. I gave her a bunch of ammo, and I kind of just let Billy walk around free without anything for whatever reason. And it kind of fucked me over because, I'd get in situations where I'd have to send Billy somewhere, or I'd have to let Rebecca go somewhere where I didn't have enough ammo or other resources to that person, and I thought that was a cool element. And I also like the puzzles that they kind of introduced with that, where there's puzzles where you have to use both characters to do it, where you have to do one thing as one character and then switch really fast to the other character to do something else. The part that I really can't appreciate or understand is the complete removal of item boxes. In every other Resident Evil game, you have save rooms with a typewriter and an item box to store items you don't need at that moment. And before this game, there was you couldn't just discard anything, right? You had to find an item box. You couldn't just discard something that you didn't want, which is a very annoying thing that I'm glad that they eventually removed. But they went to the opposite extreme, where you can drop everything. You can drop whatever you want whenever you want, but there's no item boxes. You just have to leave it in the middle of a room and come back later and get it. Now, it wasn't too much of an issue for me because I played it where I left my stuff near a typewriter most of the time, but it was frustrating because it really felt like about 70% of this game was just inventory management, was just backtracking, was just going back and getting items. For the first hour or so in this train, I was absolutely loving this game, and I was like, why do people hate this? This is awesome. Like, I love the puzzle box feel of it, and I that system worked because you had like these little lifts that you could send stuff up and down between the two characters, but also the map was small enough where it didn't really matter. It worked, like you could remember where you left stuff. As it went on, it just became more and more as a hassle than anything because the maps kept getting bigger and bigger. Really don't care for the story here. You know, I'm not a big fan of prequels to begin with. I often find them to just be answering questions I was never asking in the first place, but even if that wasn't the case, I just don't think that any of the reveals here are very good. Like, if there's anything you're going to do, I don't think there's any reason to do a prequel to the original Resident Evil, except maybe to explore the character of Wesker, maybe explore why he did what he did, and you barely get Wesker in this game. He's a very small part of it. You have this reveal that the T-virus and this whole raccoon incident happened because you had a disgruntled Spencer who shapeshifted into this emo-looking guy and who released slugs. And it's like, okay, like, that sucks. I think they ruined the character of Birkin in this game, where in RE2, he's this very tragic figure, he's this very sympathetic figure, and then in this game, it's just revealed that, yeah, he was the bad guy all along. He was working with Wesker all along. He's a bad guy. He's a villain. And I think that kind of ruins the character, that ruins the interest that I would ever have in him. And I'm not a fan of the creatures in this game. I think, aside from, obviously you have the classic zombies, but I would say maybe the majority of enemies in this game are some form of like insects. They're bugs, they're roaches, they're cockroaches, they're scorpions, shit like that. And I just don't find those things intimidating. I don't find them scariest. I mean, like, maybe if I encountered a giant scorpion or a giant bug in real life, I would be scared, but when I'm playing a zombie game, I don't want to be fighting bugs. I don't find that scary at all. Now, take that with a grain of salt, because I did play this on easy difficulty, which I never do. I did it because I just kind of wanted to go through it fast and complete it so I can put my thoughts out there, but I never really felt all that tense. I never felt like the game was all that scary. I never felt like I really had limited resources or like there were so many zombies that I couldn't handle it. I just never really felt like this game was intense or scary in any way. I think, if I recall correctly, I'm pretty sure I also played the RE1 remake on a pretty easy difficulty for the same reason. And that game, I was very tense all the way through. Maybe it's the music, just a personal thing. Horror games are much more scary when you don't have constant background music, like this game sort of does. So I like RE0 more than most. I think it's decent. I had a good time with it. But if I'm ever in the mood for old school Resident Evil, I'm either going to play one of the 3 originals or the RE1 remake. I'm never going to choose to play this.
Resident Evil 5.
Resident Evil 5 would probably be a lot better of a game if it wasn't completely in the shadow of what came before. Because RE4 was the most beloved entry in the franchise up to this point, and arguably still is, even with the remake being so popular. And because it's the first one to prominently feature action in its gameplay. It's a tale as old as time that studios and artists will eventually learn the wrong lesson from previous success, and that's exactly what happened here. The action-horror ratio is significantly less even than it was in RE4. Like, it's probably 50-50 in RE4. It might as well be 100-0 in RE5. There's tense sequences here and there, sure. I mean, there's lickers. That feels like RE2, right? But at no point did I feel the dread that, like, the best entries in this franchise just ooze effortlessly time and time again. There's sequences here that feel like they are just the dollar store ripoff version of RE4. You fight a masked chainsaw man in a village, except this time the arena fucking sucks, and there's no timer to run off. You just have to kill the guy, and all of these villagers... Oh god, it's so bad. You fight an annoying guy who attaches himself to the mouth of a giant creature, But it's different this time because it's on a boat. Okay? You literally fight a version of El Gigante again, except this time you have turrets with unlimited ammo, and it's just really lame. Hell, you even have the return of a really annoying female sidekick that adds nothing to the game, that just cries out. It's a damsel in distress character. I think the claim that everything after 4 is just a 4 claim that I see online is a little ridiculous, but this is certainly the most egregious in that regard. There's just nothing here that feels particularly original to this franchise or gaming in general. As for the characters, my first hot take of this video will be that I've never been that enamored with Chris Redfield. He's just a literal caricature of stock, cool, military guy. I just don't care. He has no discernible personality at all. As for Shiva, I'm not even 100% sure that she qualifies as being a character. It's so obvious that she's just a stand-in for a co-op partner. Her AI is so comically awful that I could probably make a whole video about that. I have too much to say about her AI. It's so bad. I honestly don't know if I'd be able to recite the story to this game if you put a gun to my head and I just finished it before writing the script. Stuff just kind of happens. Our characters do stuff and go places and shoot stuff and stab stuff and throw stuff, but nothing feels like fluid or natural progression like, I don't know, a story should feel. That's not to say this game is all bad, though. I really do like the return of Wesker. Yeah, I think he's actually much better handled in this game than the original. I don't know how unpopular that is. And Jill, even if she's very underutilized, I still like to see her back. It is very weird how underutilized she is, though. Like, there's this returning thing throughout the game where you have this masked figure that's with Irving, who was like the villain of the first half of the game. And it's like so painfully obvious that it's Jill. And then she literally just shows up unmasked. She's like unmasked. It's like a Scooby-Doo villain moment. She's unmasked. She's just out of the game. You never see her again. And that's weird. But I still like to see her back. And then about half the boss fights are really good. And actually, surprisingly, the Ari, trope of like shoot yellow eye, pus spill out, that's in every one of these games. It's actually some of the best of the game. I really like those boss fights. The 2 Ouroboros, I think they're called, fights in this game. One comes early, one comes towards the mid-game. I actually really like both of those. The Wesker fights, not really a big fan of. They're really lame. But the mechanic of splitting resources between the 2 main characters, it's pretty fun and unique. While I would never play this game again, it certainly has its merits, and it's a perfectly playable, fine action experience.
Resident Evil.
There's one Resident Evil game that is sort of hard for me to talk about. As I said in the beginning, I have zero experience with the original 4 games in this franchise, only the remakes. Fortunately, you don't need to know much about those original games to have an opinion on said remakes, because from what I've heard, they actually replicate the experience pretty much perfectly. Except Resident Evil 3. If you talk to any diehard fan of those PS1 games, they'll tell you this is a sad and shallow imitation of a classic. And while I obviously can't really comment on that, but as far as my experience, the game is pretty good. Not great. Not great at all, but it's pretty good. It's great to have Jill back. And Carlos, pretty fun little sidekick. Not the most memorable, but not the worst. God, it's definitely not the worst. Although I do prefer the one-location backtracking of the Spencer Mansion and RPD, openly exploring Raccoon City was the natural progression of things in terms of the setting. However, even experiencing the story for the first time in 2022 with no prior knowledge of the original, there's still some very, very clear flaws. First of all, this game is just way too short. You can finish it in like 6 hours, which is just insane and inexcusable, I think, for a $60 price tag. And honestly, I have no idea what they were thinking with Nemesis. I mean, yeah, he looks cool, like he's awesome visually, but that's really about it. I'll have plenty of time to talk about how much I love the Stalker variety that this franchise has in these games, but man, why does Nemesis have to be so scripted? Mr. X was utilized brilliantly less than a year before this came out. I genuinely still do not understand why they couldn't just do the same thing here. There was not a single time where this guy showed up where I was surprised. I mean, it's just every time you're in danger, or every time like you're about to progress, he just like busts through a wall like the Kool-Aid Man. It's lame. It doesn't help that every boss fight, I think, from my memory, is some form of Nemesis. And so by the end, you just have Nemesis fatigue. If you catch this one on sale, it's definitely worth playing, but it's a huge disappointment for how incredible the other two remakes are.
Resident Evil
7. After the universally awful reception of Part 6, Capcom, for the first time in about 12 years, sat down in a boardroom and said, what if the most iconic survival horror franchise of all time was survival horror? Resident Evil 7, or Resident Evil Biohazard, or if you're in Japan, Biohazard? Oh, yeah, never mind. It's okay. That makes more sense. Okay. It has almost nothing to do with the previous entries until the very end of the story, but we'll get there. It follows Ethan Winters, who goes to the Louisiana swamps to find his missing wife, Mia. The first-person perspective was a first for this franchise and was clearly inspired by similar titles around this time, like Outlast and the PT demo. And every day, I hate myself for never getting the chance to play the PT demo. And now it's just lost media forever. It's horrible. It's a very divisive creative decision that I overall actually really like in both of the games that it was implemented in. If this is meant to be a reset, why not just go all the way and completely change the perspective as well? I think people were just mad about this decision because this franchise was so revolutionary in creating new concepts and ideas for survival horror that the idea of it like adapting to the times was like a threat to certain people, and I can kind of understand that, but I kind of don't either way. I kind of don't at the same time. I still prefer the third-person perspective. That's how I choose to play these games. If I had a choice, I would play third-person perspective all the way, but I think it really works for the kind of game that these are. And I have to say, the first few hours of this game is by far the most terrifying, scariest gaming experience I have ever had. This is the only time I've played a horror game where I literally had to take breaks because it was so intense. The Baker House is much more in the vein of the Spencer Mansion or the RPD rather than the castles and villages and cities of the last three entries. And I'm just going to say right now, it's a huge bias of mine when I'm talking about this franchise. If it's not obvious already, the puzzles and the backtracking is my favorite element of these games, and it was so refreshing to see them return. It's split up into 3 segments where you are going against a member of this fucked up Baker family, each inspired by classic horror films. Jack is basically Leatherface, Marguerite is basically The Fly, and Lucas is basically Jigsaw. Each of these sections are really good and spice up both the puzzles and the gameplay. So why is RE7 this low if I have nothing but praises to sing, apparently? Well, I think it completely falls apart, starting with the final Jack boss battle in the shed. The bosses up to this point are super creative and new for this franchise. One is not only just creatively devoid, because it's, yet again, for the third time I'm going to mention in this video, Yellow Eyeball Shoot Pus. It's that. But it's also just a super frustrating boss battle that just sucks. Completely sucks. I mean, you're constantly falling between these 2 floors, and this Jack monster can just grab you at any time and like cut your health in half at least. It's just a terrible boss fight. And then you have what is one of the stupidest decisions in a video game, like character decision that the game forces you to make, where you have this decision where you have to give this single serum to your wife or Zoe. Zoe is just like this random girl that we've talked to on the phone a few times. Yeah, it's very weird, and if you pick Zoe, both of them die, so there's absolutely zero incentive to ever pick Zoe, and I don't think anybody who has ever played this game, for the first time at least, has ever chosen Zoe. It's very strange. But come on, that's not nearly enough to ruin it. It's just a bump on the road. I'm sure we will escape with Mia and live happily ever after, and the game is going to end. We're going to ride off into the sunset like so many of these games do. I wish. I truly did think this game was over at this point because, I mean, what else could there to be? I mean, this is already like an 8-hour game as is. That's pretty standard for RE standards. And then you have to get Mia's backstory on this ship, and oh my god, the ship segment just drags on forever, and it's not interesting. And then you have to cave segment, and that goes on forever. And oh, the cave, it connects to the house. Wow. That's almost as shocking as Jill being the masked figure. And the Bakers are actually sympathetic because it's 2017. We can't just make villains villains sometimes. And this little girl that vomits black goo is actually the old lady in the wheelchair in the house, and she's behind everything. I really, really don't care for the hours of exposition dump after the natural ending of this game. I mean, just let it be ambiguous if it means I don't have to slog through this trash. All cultivating with the worst final boss possibly ever, and the return of Chris Redfield. Wow, this was completely necessary to bring back my favorite character. As bad as the third act of this game is, I genuinely think this was a brilliant way to reinvent the series. It's very possible that this franchise could have died if this one didn't come around and save it, although it should have just been a completely isolated story.
Resident Evil.
8. Resident Evil Village is a great entry in this franchise. It's a fantastic follow-up to 7 and actively at least attempts to fix a lot of the problems that game had. Ethan is much more of a character this time around, rather than the silent, nameless protagonist he might as well have been in 7. I really sympathize with his journey of trying to find his baby more than I did with his journey of trying to find his wife. Maybe that's just because he gave more emotion this time around, or maybe that's because, I don't know, you sympathize with a baby more than you do a fully grown person. I don't know. But the twist ending revealing why he was able to take as much damage as the T-1000 over these two games, I actually really appreciated, even if it didn't feel completely like it was playing the entire time. A big criticism of 7 was the fact that Ethan just literally got his arms chopped off and everything. Like, he took so much damage in that game that was absolutely ridiculous. So I have no idea if that twist was actually planned, or if it was just like Capcom saying, oh shit, we need to explain why he took as much damage as the T-1000, and this is what they gave us. But I'm happy either way. Call it an RE4 clone all you want. I really don't care. I just really love Gothic RE. This village setting is so cool. I love the way it's structured with the 4 very distinct different settings. You have the Lady D segment, which is very much in like the vein of Mr. X or Nemesis. It's very much classic Resident Evil where you're in one building. You have the Heisenberg section, which is great. He's one of the best bosses in this entire franchise. You have the whole doll baby section, which is great. That's probably the scariest thing this franchise ever has. I really think that this game is consistently pretty great, almost through until the end. Really, my only issue is I can't help but feel like this is just a greatest hits of Resident Evil. If you like the contained location puzzle solving of 1 and 2, here's the Lady D segment. If you like the gothic feel of 4, here's the village setting. If you want to shit your pants from fear like Biohazard, here's the baby segment. God forbid if you're one of like 16 people on Earth that likes the action-heavy 5 and 6, here's that completely unnecessary Chris segment that might as well be a Call of Duty DLC. That one major gripe aside, this is a great companion piece to 7, and honestly might be the most coherent 1-2 punch in the entire franchise.
Resident Evil.
I knew Resident Evil Requiem was going to be good. I hoped it was going to be great. And it turned out absolutely amazing. This is the perfect blend of action and horror that I never thought that this franchise would ever find. I'll go as far as to say that this should be the new standard for this genre going forward. The first few hours inside of this care center is undeniably peak Resident Evil. After just playing for about 90 minutes on release night, I was already convinced it would be at least top 4, if not even higher. I loved every single thing about this early game. The Care Center is a fantastic setting, and I really liked all of the new gameplay mechanics introduced. I would actually argue this feels more like the OG Resident Evil than 7, like the creators originally said. You really have to strategize your routes and account for every single enemy in a way that I haven't really felt like I had to do since the first 2 games. And of course you have a return of Crimson Heads, at least in spirit. I also really enjoy the crafting system in this game, although they absolutely got the idea of the blood collector from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre game, but it was great. Grace is like no other RE protagonist. She's quirky and awkward and clumsy and stammers over her words, and I liked her a lot and appreciate that we finally have a character that, there's some people out there that can probably relate to. But of course, that's only half of this game. The other half is dedicated to the King Leon Kennedy. His half is much more in the vein of Part 4. I see a running trend here. It's much more action-packed, but not in a way that I ever felt like was too over the top. I think switching between these two gameplay styles was just brilliant. I think this franchise at times can run out of steam when it tries to keep up with that anxiety-inducing intensity for the entire runtime. RE7. To be honest, it took me a while to really get into Leon's half because it felt a little too OP, but once this thing turned into a full-on RE2 Legacy sequel, I was 1000% bought in. The RPD section was nostalgia bait in the best possible way. I actually loved the orphan segment, at least on first playthrough. I don't know if it works as well on subsequent ones. It's a little too scripted, but the first time you play it, it is one of the creepiest segments of the entire game. And that's what's great. And what's great about this game overall is that the story actually justifies all of the nostalgia. A lot of the time when you have a movie or a game or whatever it is that is fully based in nostalgia, that's like the lowest form of media possible. But I thought the story completely justified pretty much everything. It makes sense that we go back to Raccoon City. It's not just because we can. If I had to pick, I do prefer Grace's half of this game. It's just more effective, and I prefer the gameplay style. Although I always sighed in relief when we changed back, because now I have pretty much every weapon in the game. Now, I do have a few gripes that I have to mention. This is arguably the weakest selection of boss fights to date in the Resident Evil franchise. I think I might have died to like 2 of them. And I think that if there was an argument to be made that this game over-relies on nostalgia, I think the boss fights are certainly the problem. I think if you were going to say that, because there's like so many returning bosses, and they're unnecessary, and most of them are kind of weird. Like, you have such a great boss collection from those first 3 games, and those were the ones that you decided to go with. Main villains, both of them are heavily underutilized. Gideon is visually cool and like has this aura about him, but he's barely in the game, and by the end you realize that he's kind of just secondary to this other guy. And then you have Xeno, who is still like unknown at this moment of like who the hell this guy is, if he's Wesker, if he's a clone of Wesker, if I don't know. I mean, there's always like the rumors that he's going to be the main villain of 10, which would be cool, but I felt like he was also underutilized. The Raccoon City segment before you head into the RPD is the one part of this game that I would say is bloat. I think it lasts way too long. This whole segment where you have to go between these 3 very separate ends of the city to get parts for a bomb, I think it lasts way too long. I'm not really a fan of it. Although I do like that they very clearly took inspiration from The Last of Us and like the level design and everything. That was cool. And the biggest issue for me is that it just makes no sense for the story of this game to be about the survivors of the Raccoon City incident having like this long-term infection, and yet we never have a single mention or appearance from Jill, Chris, Rebecca, Barry, Ada, or most egregiously Claire. Seriously, it just feels like Capcom just hates Claire and is doing everything in their power to retcon her out. Sherry talks about that night like Leon's the one that like was the knight in shining armor that just showed up and saved her, and it's like, I mean, he kind of just showed up towards the end, but most of that game he's just fucking around with Ada. Claire's really the one that saved you that night, and it's really weird that she just never acknowledges her existence at all. I can understand not wanting to have everybody show back up, because then it feels like Part 6, where it's just, it would feel like Avengers Endgame or something, but we can at least talk about them. We can at least mention them. We can at least show that these characters still think about them and care about them. But despite those couple of things, this is a fantastic game. It's near perfection. And honestly, on subsequent replays, like throughout the years, depending on how much I play this game, this might go even higher. It's absolutely fantastic. I just love the top 3 games in this franchise too much to put this above any of them at this moment.
Resident Evil.
I don't throw around the term masterpiece too often, but the Resident Evil 1 remake is a masterpiece of survival horror. Take it from someone that just played this 2002 game for the first time last April, that it's everything you could possibly want from one of these games, and much, much more. Old video games don't really hold up in the same way that old movies do, so I was really shocked to find that this 23-year-old game stands the test of time perfectly. If you're a younger person that's intimidated by tank controls or fixed camera angles, please just give this a shot. For my money, the Spencer Mansion is the best and most iconic setting in this entire franchise. It's kind of just the default thing I think of when you say Resident Evil. Even though it's not quite my number one, when you say the term Resident Evil, when I think of Resident Evil, I think of Spencer Mansion, I think of Jill and Chris and Wesker and the dogs and the chemistry puzzle and everything. This is just the default Resident Evil game in my mind. This is a near perfect game that a lot of people will argue is the best possible version of it. And while I don't disagree, I still think this remake should have a remake. Just hear me out. I really don't understand the anti-video game remake crowd. You guys are just a bunch of weird gatekeepers. I saw a video the other day of a teenager playing the original 1996 RE and kind of being taken aback by the outdated dialogue and graphics. Not necessarily mocking it, just kind of just being like, wow, that's crazy. All the comments were attacking her, saying, kids these days just want shiny, perfect products. They don't understand the classics. And that's genuinely just one of the stupidest fucking things I've ever heard. You can love earlier versions, either version of this game, and still understand how someone who grew up with PS4 or PS5 graphics can appreciate an archaic style of gaming. There's an obvious movie comparison to be made, but I think there are two very different mediums. I can watch a 1970s film and appreciate it because it's a passive viewing experience, and movies haven't really changed that much over time. Video games, on the other hand, are vastly different experiences on every generation of consoles. My first real gaming console was a PS3, and a couple years ago I tried to play Red Dead Redemption on the 360, and I just couldn't do it. That's not me saying the game is bad, it's just saying I wasn't there at the right time to appreciate it, and that's completely fine. Somebody shouldn't be shunned from an incredible experience just because of when they were born or started gaming. If a Gen Alpha can't get into the RE remake because of fixed camera angles and relatively weak bosses, that's perfectly valid. Plus, you guys literally have nothing to lose. Oh, media preservation, media preservation. The original 3 games are literally available on the PlayStation 5 and aren't going to disappear anytime soon. I loved The Last of Us remake because I got to play my favorite game of all time in 60 FPS 4K. If it sucked and cut out a bunch of content, I would just never acknowledge that it exists and just continue playing the remastered. It's really not that difficult to do. I mean, if you complain about the remaster, if you complain about remakes so much, it's like, obviously you care to some extent, because you could just very easily just not acknowledge those, and you choose to, so you probably are playing them. Why don't you just, like, not play them if you don't want them? I think that's the easiest thing to do. Anyways, back finally to the topic at hand. I adore everything about this game. I think that the puzzle box that is the Spencer Mansion is the best done puzzle box of this entire franchise. Absolutely, I love it. I love the backtracking. I love Crimson Heads. They are just such a brilliant idea that is so revolutionary that I am so surprised that it took them so long. It took them 8 games to get back to some kind of version of Crimson Heads, even though Blister Heads are different, but they're very similar. Wesker, the corniest, most obvious twist villain ever, but he's just so hard not to love. I love the atmosphere is amazing. Just the vibe is amazing. The save room music is possibly my best. It's got some really creepy moments. I love everything with Lisa Trevor. I love everything about the shark section. I just love everything about this game. It's amazing, but somehow there's 2 games above it that I prefer. I don't know how.
Resident Evil 4.
4 is probably the most common number 1 placement on Resident Evil rankings, and I completely understand why. It introduced action, but opposed to 5 and 6, still has a very intense and creepy atmosphere for the entire time. The Las Plagas are basically zombies with a slight technicality that they're not. It's a completely different virus, but I think that's a big enough change in the enemy variation to feel very different from any of the other games aside from 5, obviously. And I really like how they introduce like human elements to the Las Plagas that we haven't seen, at least up to this point, where they actually have weapons and they like communicate with each other. Like, I love that aspect to this game. They tried to do that with 9, and I love the way I was mixed on how I felt about it in Requiem. I love the way that like zombies imitated how they acted when they were alive. That was awesome, but I wasn't a big fan of the zombies with guns. Here, zombies don't have guns. They just have other kind of like archaic weapons in a way. Along with 6, it is the beefiest RE game, clocking in anywhere between like 15, 25 hours, depending on what difficulty you're playing on, depending on how much you like to explore. It's by far the most bang for your buck, even on subsequent playthroughs. And something I really love about this, along with the Village, is the whole like merchant treasure aspect to it. I like that I like going around and having this treasure map and finding all these treasures and adding these treasures to this thing, and then so that it's more valuable, and then selling it to the merchant. I love the concept of the merchant, or if we're talking about village, the duke. I love the concept of just this random guy who just shows up in unexpected places that has no tie to the story whatsoever and has no like logical reason for being where he is, but he just shows up, and you can sell stuff for him. You can buy stuff from him. You can do like little tasks for him, and he'll give you things that you can trade. I love all that. You have the whole shooting range, which is awesome. Like, there's just so much in this game that I feel like isn't really present in a lot of the other ones. I would also argue this has the best gameplay in the entire franchise, I would say, obviously it's easy to say because it's the two newest games, but along with the 4 remake and the Requiem, I think have the best gameplay. I think that this one definitively, like easily, has the best boss selection. I love pretty much all the bosses in this game. The Mendez boss is awesome. The Salazar boss is awesome. El Chiante is awesome. They're all great. The Krauser one with the knife, that is awesome. And I love like the hand-to-hand, not really hand-to-hand, but sort of like hand-to-hand combat that we get in Resident Evil. You only get like a couple of those throughout the entire franchise, but yeah, I love them whenever they do it. And I'm probably forgetting a couple, but all the boss fights for the most part are awesome. I love how it's split up. Again, I keep talking about how I love when these games split up into very distinct settings, but I do. This one I think is probably the best utilization of it. I love you have it split into the village, the castle, and the island. I love the village. I adore the castle. That is my favorite. As I said, I love Gothic RE. That's my favorite. That's one of my favorite settings in the entire franchise. By the time we get to the island, I think that's definitely the weakest section, but I still think it's pretty strong. I just think it's visually the least interesting out of all 3. The only thing that really kind of drags it down to the number 2 spot, because this top 3, but especially this top 2, is very interchangeable, and it really just depends on when whatever I replayed last is probably going to get the edge. And the couple of things that kind of drag this down to number 2 is, one, I just prefer my Resident Evil to be a little smaller scale. This one, it's like I said, it's a very large scale game. I prefer mine to be a little less than this. I'm just not big on the world traversal and all that's in 4, 5, and 6. I like it when you're either, struck to one city or struck to one building. Or if you're going to do it, I think this is the best possible execution of it along with Requiem. But that's just a hint. That's just a little dent in armor. I also, at least in the remake, again, I've never played the original, I fucking hate the puzzles in the remake. I think that it is like arguably the worst puzzles in the entire franchise. I think that so many of them are so tedious and stupid, and they're all about like aligning something perfectly right, and I got so frustrated with so many of the puzzles in this game, and not in a fun way. But aside from those two gripes, this is a fantastic game. There's a reason why it's so beloved. There's a reason why some people say it's the best, I wouldn't call it survival horror, but the best action horror game of all time. A lot of people say it's the best game in this franchise, and I just really love 1 slightly more.
Resident Evil 2.
I can't even necessarily put into words why I love Resident Evil 2 more than 4 and 1. I just do. I think that Resident Evil 2 is the pinnacle of survival horror, the pinnacle of this franchise. I think it is an absolute masterpiece in every meaning of the word. I think that every single element that makes survival horror what it is, every single element that makes Resident Evil what it is perfected here. It's executed perfectly. The RPD is arguably the best setting in the entire franchise. I probably slightly prefer the Spencer Mansion, but it's still absolutely incredible. Mr. X, easily the best execution of the Stalker variety. He is genuinely horrifying. He's not very scripted. He can show up whenever he wants. It's incredible. I absolutely adore the characters of Leon and Claire. Like those, on some days you ask me, that might be my top 2 characters of the franchise. I love both of their backstories, how Leon is a rookie cop and this is his first day and there's a zombie outbreak. Like, I love the underdog thing that going on with Leon. I love the story of Claire, where she is looking for Chris from the first game, who's her brother, and that she's like not experienced at all. Like, she's just a normal person. She's not a Star Wars member, and she's putting herself in danger. She's putting herself in this situation because she cares about her brother that much. I love that. I love everything about this game. I love all of the different sequences. I think that this is one of the only Resident Evil games that doesn't fall apart towards the end. Like, even these top ones, I would say, do go down a little bit. They don't drop off as much as maybe 7 does, but they do at some point become less of a game. And I don't really think Resident Evil 2 does that. I think Resident Evil 2 is consistently incredible all the way through. Even the sewer segments, which I am a fan of more than most people. I love the sewer stuff. I love it all the way through. And I love the 2 campaigns, even though probably my only small issue is that I wish the A and B scenarios were done better. I've heard that in the original, it's actually 2 very different campaigns. Like, you play Leon A, and then you play Claire B, and Claire B is everything that Claire was doing in the background when Leon was doing his stuff, and so it's very replayable for that. The remake doesn't really have that. The A and B scenarios are pretty much the exact same. But I love the way that this game is split into the 2 different campaigns. I think that they're both absolutely worth playing. They're both incredible. I love the story differences between the 2, where, Leon has Ada in it, and Claire's, you save Sherry. If I had to choose, I probably slightly prefer Claire's campaign here, just because I like all the stuff with Sherry and this orphanage and the chief. He's really creepy, and I don't know, I just absolutely adore this game. It's one of my favorite games of all time. I can't really say enough good things about it. It's a masterpiece. And yeah, that is my Resident Evil ranking from Resident Evil 0 to Resident Evil Requiem. I had fun making this video, and so I'd be up for doing more rankings of video games or franchises, or like director filmographies, or video games, or other stuff. Or TV seasons. TV seasons would be fun. So, Resident Evil, my favorite franchise of all time, gaming franchise of all time. That's it. Ranked.